Hey again, everybody. Today we are going to be making quick bread. I chose to do a banana bread because that's what my family wanted. Plus I had these awesomely overripe brown bananas that I needed to use up. So what is the difference between a quick bread and not quick bread? So like a yeasted bread. Now for quick breads, the leavening agent is a chemical leavening agent. It's either baking soda or baking powder. In a yeast bread, the leavening agent is yeast. And yeast, you have to let it rest, give it time to rise. Whereas quick breads, you don't have to do that. So they are a lot quicker to make, hence quick breads. So we already talked about the creaming method when we're making cookies, right? So any mixing method that has you start by creaming the fat and the sugar together is the creaming method. Now the muffin method, we are going to be making a quick bread, is mixing all the dry ingredients together, mixing all the wet ingredients together, and then mixing those two together. Okay, so quick breads are kind of neat because you can make them into any shape or size that you really want depending on what pans you have. So you can bake quick breads in muffins. You can bake quick breads in tiny little pans like this, or you can bake them in bigger pans like this. You can also make them into a cake pan. The only difference will be if you make little muffins, they're going to take a lot less time in the oven than if you were to make one big old honkin' loaf. Okay, so these are the bananas that I had left over on my counter. These ones are almost black. These ones are perfect. I'm going to take a look at these and make sure they're still okay. I want to have 2 to 3 large bananas, and those ones are a good size, and these ones are small. These are actually going to be just perfect for my banana bread. If you don't have ripe bananas, sometimes you can go to the grocery store and they'll have just these bags of ripe bananas that they're probably going to end up tossing out, and they're really cheap. They're on like super duper sale. Okay, so I'm starting with the liquid ingredients, and the bananas are going to be included in my liquid ingredients. I'm just using a fork and I'm mashing them up. Since they are so overly ripe, they really mash easily. Give it a stir. Okay, the next ingredient that I'm going to use is I need melted butter. So it calls for 1/3 cup of butter, which you can see all butter cubes come with teaspoons on the side, or tablespoons. How many tablespoons? There's 8 tablespoons in 1 stick of butter, and 1/3 cup is just a little bit more than 5 tablespoons. When I'm baking, I always use unsalted butter, and I do that because most recipes are written using unsalted butter. So if you did have salted butter and that was the only butter you had, you could use it. You just might want to reduce the salt that you're going to be adding to your product so that your muffins or whatever it is you're making isn't too salty. So I'm just going to melt this in the microwave. I've got my egg. Most recipes also call for large eggs. You can buy different sizes at the grocery store, but typically they're large or extra large, and that's fine. I always crack my egg in a separate container rather than putting it in with all my other ingredients right away, because it doesn't happen very often, but every now and then you may come across an egg that is rotten. And so I always crack it into a separate container before I add it to my other ingredients, just to make sure. Okay, my butter's melting. I'm going to go ahead and add my vanilla. I need 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Okay. Make sure my butter's melted. It is. I'm going to go ahead and mix that egg in a little bit first. I'm still just using my fork. Give the butter a little stir. You want to make sure your butter isn't too hot, because if it is boiling hot and you pour it in to your mixture where you have that egg, it could potentially start cooking your egg and you'd have scrambled eggs. You don't want that. So make sure your butter isn't too crazy hot. Okay. Now this might sound counterintuitive, but sugar counts as a liquid ingredient. So I'm going to go ahead and add the sugar to my bowl of liquids as well. This recipe originally calls for 3/4 of a cup of sugar, but it does say that if you like it extra sweet, you can add up to an extra 1/4 of a cup. And if you like it less sweet, you're trying to be a little on the healthier side, you can use even a 1/2 cup, and the flavor of the bread is still good. I'm using a 1/4 of a cup measure, so I'm going to do 3 of those. Almost time to fill up my sugar bin. That was almost full. Okay. So I'm doing 3/4 of a cup in mine. Now, if you have a whisk, I prefer to use a whisk. If you don't, you can continue to use the fork and it'll be just fine. My banana mixture is nice and smooth. Now, on to my dry ingredients. I need 1.5 cups of flour. Now, I've discussed in the cookie lab how to measure flour. You want to lightly spoon it into your dry measuring cup and then gently level it off. So 1.5 cups of flour. Now I need 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Now since I used my 1 teaspoon for my vanilla, and I don't want to dip that into my soda because it'll contaminate it, right? My baking soda. I'm going to use the 1/2 and I'm going to do it twice. So I'm going to do 2 halves because 2 halves make a whole. That's my baking soda, and I need a pinch of salt. So I'm just going to take a nice size pinch. The salt kind of brings out the sweetness. Now I have just my rubber spatula. I'm just going to give that a little stir so that the ingredients kind of mix together. Now if you like cinnamon in your banana bread, feel free to add some cinnamon. I might do a little layer of cinnamon sugar in between some of the batter, even though the recipe doesn't call for it, because just why not, right? Add a little fun to it. Okay, so I've got my dry ingredients, I've got my wet ingredients. Get my, and I'm going to mix them together. Now at this point, just like in the cookie lab, I do not want to over mix my batter. That is because I don't want to develop the gluten in the flour, because that will make my muffins very tight and dense and have an unappealing mouthfeel and tunneling. So we just want to be very gentle when we're mixing this, and we just want to mix it just until everything's combined. Okay? Make sure you scrape the bottom of the bowl, because sometimes the dry ingredients kind of hide in little pockets. You don't want to have pockets of dry ingredients in your muffins either. And I'm done. If you wanted to add some chocolate chips or nuts, you could have mixed those in as well. But I'm just going to do mine plain with that little cinnamon sugar swirl in the center. Okay, so for the cinnamon swirl, in a bowl, I'm just going to add 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm just going to mix that up with a spoon. Okay, now I'm going to take my loaf pan and I'm going to give it a little spray. You can also use butter to coat this. Make sure you get the bottom, because you don't want your bread sticking to the bottom. Then I am just going to pour half of my batter in. Then I'm going to take this cinnamon and sugar mixture and I'm going to sprinkle it all over. I'm going to save a little bit for the top. Then I'm going to put the rest of my batter in. Spread it out evenly on top. Don't waste any of your batter. Then I'm gonna do a light sprinkling of more cinnamon and sugar on top. Okay, so the oven is preheated to 350 degrees. Here is my banana bread, and I'm gonna go ahead and stick it in the middle of the oven, and I'm going to keep my eye on that. Now, my only concern is that the top of the bread is going to brown too quickly for the inside. So if I notice that the top is getting a little too dark, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some aluminum foil and I'm going to cover the top of the bread with the aluminum foil. Now that'll reflect off the heat from the top of it, so it won't brown anymore on the top, but it will allow the insides to cook a little bit more. The way to tell if your quick bread is cooked completely, the best way would be to use a thermometer. However, I'm just going to use the toothpick method. So I'm going to take it in toothpick, I'm going to insert into the center of my bread, and I'm going to pull it out. If it's still gummy and goopy, then I know it needs a little bit longer to bake. If it comes out and there's just some little kind of moist crumbs on it, then I'm good to go. So keep your eye on it because you don't want the top to burn. Okay, so it has been about 25 minutes and my nose can smell it. The more you bake, the more attuned your nose will get to things cooking and the smell of when they're maybe done or even start to burn. So I am going to cover mine, it looks nice and brown in there, with some aluminum foil to prevent the top from browning anymore, because of that cinnamon and sugar that I sprinkled on top, sugar tends to burn a little quicker, and so I just want to make sure that that doesn't get too dark. So I'm going to pull out the rack so that I don't risk burning my forearm. And I'm just going to put this piece of foil right on top. Okay, push it right back in and keep on going. Okay, so it has been about 45 minutes, so I'm going to pull it out and take a look. So the foil won't be hot, but the pan is very hot, so be careful. And take my toothpick, insert into the center, and it is still, if you can see that, it is still really kind of goopy, so I know it needs a lot more time. So I'm going to stick it back in there for about 7 minutes, and then I'm going to try it again. Okay, it's been 7 more minutes. We're going to pull it out and do the toothpick test one more time. Oh, it's starting to smell so good. My kids are dying to eat it, so hopefully it's ready. It looks a little puffier. You can always jiggle the tin really gently and see if it wobbles. If it wobbles, you know you definitely need more time. It's not wobbling, which is good. Oh, it looks pretty clear. Let's try it over here. So I see there's just a couple crumbs on here, and it just looks a little, just tiny bit. I'm going to say this needs maybe 3 more minutes. Okay, I let it sit in there for an extra 3 minutes, and I just pulled it out of the oven. I'm going to let it cool for about 5 to 10 minutes in the loaf pan before I carefully depan it and then let it cool completely on a cooling rack. Since I put the cinnamon sugar on top, it makes it a little bit more difficult, but I'm just going to run a butter knife around the edges to make sure none of the edges are sticking, and lift up a little bit and tilt it, because the bottom usually is the issue, and there's nothing worse than spending all that time baking a beautiful loaf of quick bread only to have the bottom stick inside your pan and it to just kind of crumble as it comes out. So I'm going to kind of gently try to depan it into my hand and then put it right back up. I'm just going to let that cool. Try to let it cool completely, although I don't think that my kids are going to allow it to happen, but I'm going to do my best, at least 10 minutes.